Thank you very much, Chaturanga, and our guest this evening is a gentleman who has 26 years of parliamentary experience and is quite a name within the United National Party and very well known to the public of the Republic of Sri Lanka. He's right here, having also held several positions at ministerial level and including in the Cabinet of Ministers, where during his one of his last jobs he was also selected as the best finance minister in Asia 2017. It's none other than Mr. Ravi Karunaka. Very good evening to you, Ravi.
Good evening, Faraz.
And thank you very much for popping into Newsline Live.
Thank you.
In our new settings. Can I get straight to the point and ask you, what is this difference of opinion that you and one of your colleagues, Mr. Mangala Samaravira, has in terms of the presidential ability to dip into the consolidated fund or not? I would have thought that you'd, in these exceptional times, you would have some sort of unity.
No, I mean, sense of unity exists all over, but it just, the differing opinion is that at a time when there is a contingency or emergency, and at a time when you can't recall Parliament for reasons best known on the pandemic, on the corona, the situation that I say is that while the vote on account has given funds for 3 months, which basically comes to end on the 30th of April 2020, and if by that time the funds are extinguished, the President under 153
right,
or under contingencies on the situation which basically he has no other exception but to spend on the consolidated fund under 151 and 152,
right,
he can spend until and such time that he can bring in or recall Parliament, either the new Parliament or the existing Parliament.
Right.
But whatever the situation is, I say that finally the legality must prevail.
right,
And the only thing is recalling, utilizing the consolidated fund to spend exists in the President's hand is what I say.
And so clearly, with all this sort of diverse views, even within the mainstream political party and its members, wouldn't it have been the almost obvious thing for President Rajapaksa to consult and seek an opinion from the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that is the necessity at this particular hour. But what he has basically decided was that he will go forward with the 30th of April and after that decide what has got to be done. Right. But now that it ceased to go forward, that means today is the 6th of May, and he has no other option but to utilize the consolidated fund. I think it is prudent that the Supreme Court is called upon to give an opinion. Which
is now, in any case, several parties have gone forward to the Supreme Court.
But that's going to public litigation.
Right. So now we have about 11 different people going to and organizations, including a group of about 8 people led by Victor Ivan. Then we have the Center for Policy Alternatives, and we have the young legal man, Charita Gunratna, also having sort of knocked on the Supreme Court's door. But there's something that I noticed: the United National Party haven't taken any action. What are they? Why is that?
No, it is just because the rest of the Dimbang wants to go to court.
Yeah.
It does not necessarily mean that we have got to. We are doing certain other things.
I would have thought that you all would have led the
No, we are doing something more. We are doing something more spectacular. We'll see. And
are you able to tell us what that is?
We'll see in the next couple of days. We like to keep it.
Why not tell us here on Newsline?
No, what we want to do is to ensure that the spending is made legal, and we will follow through as to what we intend doing with that particular one.
Okay. Now then,
because
as always,
really the first and the second case have been gone, is to ensure that you basically renunciate the gazette that was done, which
right,
was revoked in the Parliament.
Yes.
That is a different one to what we are saying.
That's right.
We are saying that is a different one. We are going on the basis whatever spend that has got to be done should be made legal.
Right. As always on Newsline Live, we encourage you to send us your questions by SMS, please, right here. But don't call the number 0772 300 305, 0772 300 305. And who better than Mr. Ravi Karunaka to answer the questions? After all, a former finance minister of Sri Lanka. Now then, whilst we are waiting for the questions to start coming in, can I ask you this? Independent analysis of the employment figures and so on suggests that perhaps up to about 1.1 million people may well be out of a job. Isn't that the conversation that the country ought to be having now?
Well, that is most important one. After all, the workforce has roughly about 7.5 billion, with 1.6 million people being on the government side, which basically spend roughly about 90 billion. That is for the salaries and the pensions per month, and having an impact of 1.1 trillion for a year. Now that is 1.6 billion of the workforce is on government servants.
Right.
Then you have the private sector, which is roughly about 2 million. Then you have the day-in workers, roughly about 1.8, and the self-employed, which is roughly about 1.8 billion. So when you put all together, it's about 7.6 billion of the workforce. And certainly your figure, what you mentioned, may be even more, considering the fact that the self-employed are severely hampered, and the day-to-day workers are basically, will find that it's hard to find a day's work that is
62% of the workforce are
informal sector,
unskilled.
Unskilled and informal sector.
How are we going to sort them out?
Well, I don't think the informal sector will have the difficulty, but it will be the middle class and more or less the entrepreneurial skills that are there of the people that will get basically stagnated, or I would say basically held up, owing to the fact that there will be lack of demand, lack of fund flows that will be given from the banks, so into thinking whether it is a dangerous time, and the interest rates in any case preclude people from borrowing, because the region has an interest rate of about 5 to 6%, when Sri Lanka has 14 to 16%. So I think one of the first things that need to do is to recreate the, I would say, the environment for borrowing at a cheaper rate, so that your risk factor is reduced.
And the other thing, of course, to ask is that companies all over the world, but let's talk about Sri Lanka itself, are completely, if you like, for want of a better word, stuffed because of the global economic conditions caused by COVID-19. Do you think that this government is doing enough in terms of relief aid? We have a figure of a pretty low figure of 0.03% of the GDP, which seems rather low to me, compared to other economies where it's around roughly about 10% of GDP.
Faraz, if you look at the Sri Lankan economy, which is roughly about 115 trillion, right, which basically works out to about 50 billion a day. Right, when you 50 billion a day in GDP terms, right, then what you're basically look at is absolutely nothing. Stimulus package that has been given, 50 billion, hardly sufficient. That is one day's revenue.
Right.
So that would be insufficient to resurrect us from the economic plague that has taken place, owing to the fact that Corona has. But I must say that the economy was not any case healthy even before Corona. Right. So there were rectifications that were needed to be done. You look at the state of the economy. If you look at the 2020 year, you had roughly the total revenue being about 1,980 billion.
Right.
That's 980 coming from customs, about 800 coming from inland revenue, 120 from excise, and the balance from dividends and fines, etc., which was coming to 1,980 billion. And your expenditure was roughly about 4,600, which was going on the basis of interest about $1 billion, capital repayment about 800 million, your salaries and pensions of 1.1 trillion, then your capital expenditure 760, your public maintenance and utilities 760. When you go on to that basis, you are suddenly finding that you are yawning gap between 4,600, that's 4.6 trillion, against a revenue of 1.9 trillion. So your budget deficit of 2.6 trillion was roughly about 5% of GDP.
Right.
But today you're talking of a GDP of last year ending at about 11% of GDP, and this year projected to be around 11 to 12% of the GDP.
Right.
So on that score, you have got to do far more than what it is that is seen in order to get the economic kick started. You have 50 days of curfew, that is a complete lockdown, and you don't know when it will open up, because I must say that's well beyond the control of the government. And on this score, you are basically having a situation that you are unable to get the future prognosis as to when the country would be started. So on that score, you need a much bigger stimulus package, and I think it has to be revolutionary. You know, these like coming out of the Second World War, when everything is dead and gone, and you have to think afresh. If you go to look at what the IMF, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank are going to say, you will get nowhere. So you have got to start your own activities.
Right.
Start, you know, local economic revival. You know, if you can't get that, get foreign technology that is coming. If not, get foreign investment. All those will be dearer. I mean, easy to talk from opposition point of view. But these are what we did when we came in on 8th of January 2015.
Now then, several questions coming through, and one is that there's some sort of consternation, and I think that your members of your party have also said the same thing, that this 5,000 rupees isn't good enough, isn't enough.
No, it is hardly sufficient.
What is the amount that you would, if you were the finance minister, what would you do?
Well, you today, if you look at the poverty ratio that are shown,
Yeah.
a family of 4 to 5 require about 65,000 rupees a month. That is shown from the government statistics. And on that score, you are basically looking at today 5,000 being given against that.
Ravi, somebody else is also saying successive governments have brought the country's economy to the current state that it is in. Do you agree?
I agree that. For the 73 years as independence, every country, every government has been somewhat responsible for the added public debt that is there. Of course, in a developing country, public debt does basically increase. And owing to the fact that you have external externalities like the dollar being depreciated, owing to currencies appreciating in other countries that are out of our control, you basically have a situation today, we have 13 trillion as public debt. And on that score, you're basically having a huge, almost 25% of government revenue going against debt amortization and interest payment. So when you say 5,000 is hardly sufficient, now you have two ends. One is basically the external factor. Which
there's another question here. In terms of the expenditure and the situation the current government faces at the moment, compounded of course by COVID-19, it is absolutely astounding that a couple of projects which was unable to be implemented by under the government of Mr. Wickremesinghe and Sirisena, which you were part of, namely Section 3, the highway and so on. Section 4 was also stuck. It's almost, and that was cancelled. The bank withdrew its offer, and so on. And you know, now they have now announced, in between all this and no money, the private sector is taking a salary cut, on the understanding that when things get better, they will come back to the level that they were, and even better perhaps. But to then, in between all this, to ask the public sector, as indeed Dr. Jayasundara wrote to them yesterday and asked them to take a salary cut or to donate part of their salary, that's completely unacceptable.
Well, the government service, as I said, has 16 lakhs of workers, which is roughly 1.6 million, and the total bill of 90 billion a month being salaries and pensions. So on that score, you find the cash flow problem that they exist, because when the government came in, one of the main things that, remember when we pushed up the revenue from 1 trillion in 2014 to 2 trillion in 2018, you basically had a 100% increase in revenue. But what happened was, after 2018 to 2020, you basically had the same stagnant revenue. It was 18 to...
But Ravi, would you agree with me when I say that half the frustration of the people of the country and the entrepreneurs of our country who want to take this country forward, and the opportunity makers, the creators of opportunity, half those problems would have been not present if the level of corruption was under control. Successive governments in Sri Lanka have done almost nothing about the level of corruption.
Faraz, that's a very easy word to throw out. Every government is thrusted upon that.
Yeah.
What basically happens is, when you can't get a job done, it is corruption that is there. My belief is lack of decision making, indecisiveness, and basically the government servants procrastinating decisions. Now I'll just show you one classic example to give you an answer. From 2005 to 2018, the total direct taxes that has been paid. This country, we have only roughly about 100,000 direct tax files.
Right.
And you have a total direct taxation of 2.4 trillion collected.
Yeah.
In rupee terms, in direct taxation. The rupee depreciation for the same period 2005 to 2018, if I couldn't get 219 as we are not in office, was 2.5 trillion. So your entire direct taxation has lost out to devaluation.
Well,
so on that basis,
that's almost understood, because when you all took over, the dollar was 130 for various reasons, including the matters of the central bank and so on. We ended up with, what was it, when President Nandasena took over, it was what, about 180 plus.
But that's exactly what I'm telling. These are things that you've got to action. They look at trying to say 30% taxes coming in direct taxation. They don't worry about what doesn't happen that's strengthening the rupee. You're probably balance of payments on one side, which is the dollar reserve that are there matching the rupees that are required to make dollars to pay out. You basically lose out owing to the inefficiency factor of not taking the correct decision at the right time.
Several questions asking us to ask you to give a specific figure. Why, if you were the Minister of Finance, the 5,000 you say isn't enough. How much in rupees and cents would you give?
Well, I would basically, without any fear, I'm a person that on behalf of the government that I represent, the United National Party, when we said we are giving 10,000 rupees for the government servants, which for 11 years they were languishing not getting it, in 31 days we were able to give it, and they still stand to get 10,000 rupees increase in their salaries. Likewise, during this period, when there's a chronic situation, I would have, without any fear, ensured that each family gets a minimum of 20,000. 20,000
And
rupees.
how would you do that? Print more money?
No, that's not the case. Remember, did we pay the 10,000 by printing more money? No, we had innovative skills. We managed to get super gain taxes that were there one-off. In order till the revenues were there.
There were a lot of unhappy cookies.
There are a couple of 10 guys will be unhappy, but you've got to look at the 21 million people that are there.
Right.
That's why it's the indecisiveness. And if you do that, you'll suddenly have somebody saying...
But we have the opposite of that when in this government...
Can I just give you an answer to the last one?
Yeah.
I want to stress the fact that when you are basically taking a bold initiative on behalf of the economy, you will have 10 people that will basically be guiding you by saying, these are a pack of guys who are basically having a vested interest and trying to top it over. But I just showed how direct taxation, we want to reduce it from the 30% down to 12% and show that you give a stimulus to the economy by ensuring that you work for yourself rather than work for the government. And end of the day, you end nowhere because the tax files are there. It is a matter of government servants just pushing one tax file into the other without getting revenue. But on the other side, you have created a huge incentive into the market by having been one of the lowest tax regions in this area.
Politically speaking, what would you do? Because I can't see any difference. It's almost like you're the current Minister of Finance. What would you do?
No, I am not.
Politically speaking, what would you do different that this government is doing?
Well, I think President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has the decisiveness in making a decision and standing by. I will basically tell him to ensure he has a non-party approach to make a national economy out of this state. Well, it's not an easy situation. There's no point me from opposition, maybe temporary or otherwise. Are
you promoting the cause of a national government?
No, I'm not. I'm saying a national economy. Right. Because if we lose the economic war, we have lost all wars. Remember, we had a war for 30 years. We lost, I would say, 200 trillion. And end of the day, where are we? Then we come out of that into a tsunami. Then we come out of that into a Easter bomb. Then we come into that into
that 10,000 rupee thing, wasn't that one, what shall we call it? Wasn't that an election gundu?
Well,
didn't it cause you a great deal of panic later when you became the Minister of Finance?
Political parties have to get elected, and in order in doing elections, you've got to give certain things which are practical. Now, as a collective, as a party, they decided that they give 10,000 to the government servants.
Right.
Remember, when we gave 10,000, a lack of gratitude. At the end of the day, when they voted, we had almost 65% of government servants not voting for us. Yeah. But we still stood by the promise we gave. That's why I said, if you basically give a word, you've got to carry it out. Same way I say at this particular moment, they are being, the 5,000 is a pittance, it's a political gimmick.
So you'd give them 20,000?
I give 20,000 as well as ensure that the banks are given a much easier task. Today, when you go to get a bank loan.
But they didn't give them 20,000, they gave them 5,000, but they passed two projects at this time. Isn't that spectacularly poor timing?
Well, that is a government's call, that we basically saying, when they're saying they're stuck for money going on that basis, it's hilarious. But remember, that's two ends. One is a capital expenditure and one is a recurrent expenditure.
Does the President have the right, when you say that he has the right under Section 153 and so on, to spend money on capital expenditure?
No. What he has basically got is the amount of
public services.
The money that is there to be spent. On the 23rd of October 2019, we allocated on the vote of account 1,469 as expenditure and 721 billion as borrowing.
Right.
Now that borrowing can go into capital expenditure as well.
Right.
So whether this, I think it is 50, I think it's relatively for 58 kilometers of 161 billion that has been basically utilized to spend for this particular one, and I think 31 has been allocated for this fourth phase, that is Kurunegala project, for a British company called Roughton or something like that, right? Which is 58.5 kilometers, total expenditure 161 billion and 31 billion for the first phase.
No difference from the figures that was being bandied about
when we were doing it, the exchange rate was roughly in the range of 158 to 60, 170 rupees a dollar. Yeah. And then now
but this is set in dollars anyway.
These rupees.
Right.
31 billion was rupees.
Right.
So it will basically be, now is 200. So you'll have almost a 20% increase.
Right.
So that's the case whether it is within the borrowing limits that are there. But that is irrelevant. I'm only going.
But at $200 million and at a commercial rate of about 6,000 rupees per PCR test, we can test about 6.3 million people.
I don't in any way say no to that. I guess we should be testing up to about 10,000 people a day. But we are not. We are just.
Well, we have said 6 million people at $200 million.
Yeah, but even in USA, you have only about 100,000 being tested. So I guess with our per capita income, we have to be realistic in what we do.
Yeah.
But if not for what UMP increased from health expenditure from 1.1% GDP to 3% in the 15, 16, 17, 18 years, you would have been really hamstrung today without health expenditure. Now, on that score, what you are basically saying, there are two ways. One is the capital expenditure for the roads and the recurrent expenditure that is there for health that is there. Now, any amount of money can be allocated at a time of emergency in order to ensure that the people are looked at. I mean, this is not a case of trying to have an election when the people are in jeopardy. So we must first ensure the people are made to live, and that is the way you have got to go forward.
I think we finished this program at 10 o'clock. Now then, let's say, Ravi K, that if you win your seat in north of Colombo, considering that you're running with the UMP and the SJB as well and everybody else, and let's say that you win and you get another chance at the plum job to maybe re-establish yourself as the best finance minister, what would you do and how would you go about bringing the economy back again?
I would ensure that win the election, would we still have a president who is basically elected for another 4 years beyond that day. So on that basis, that's why I always meant to ensure that we have a national economy. Because if we win, if we lose the economic war, we have lost all wars. And that's why I want to strengthen, knowing the fact of the burden that is there when you have the finance.
But aren't we losing now?
Beg your pardon?
Aren't we losing that war?
That's exactly what I'm saying. If we have a concerted effort, because at the end of the day, it is a national economy. You can't say the blue, green, blue or yellow. Finally, it is a national economy. So if we basically point fingers and just let it crumble just because saying it is the opposition or government, that is the fault that we have done for 73 years. At least at this time, let's get together and ensure that we have a strong national economy that will help to ensure that we get where the Sri Lankan should be. You know, our per capita is today 4,100 when Japan is 55,000. And remember, in 1948, Japan and we were having $49 per capita per person. Today, how is the difference? They had no natural resources. They were throttled after Second World War. And the difference is the national unity and the sense of purposes they were going forward. And that's what we have got to do today.
Unfortunately, Ravi, we've run out of time today. I wanted to ask you about the open economy in the sense the open accounts to bring in foreign exchange.
I think that's a very good idea.
Amidst concerns from the Transparency International.
Well, that's the problem. You do one act that is there to bring in things. You know, today Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, everything. You look at Turkey, Indonesia, all have brought this amnesty in.
We're going to have to save this for another one.
No.
Perhaps you want to come
Okay,
on a longer program. Now then, it said somebody here is pointing out that you couldn't work with the SLFP. How can they work with Porto and other parties?
No, I don't. That's the problem again. You basically push yourself as a typical in two different camps that are there.
Right.
All what I said was a national economy didn't mean anybody. It is everybody.
It's everybody.
And everybody
so I think
means
what
that
we mean
if we
is
do it,
rise up, Sri Lanka. Rise up together, and that is the theme
it's not
song
whether you
that
can't do
like
it, whether you want to do it, and that's
Indeed.
where I want to.
And Ravi Karunanayake, thank you very much for being on NEWSLINE. We've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, MTV,
and
as well.
we'll take you through to Rise Up Sri Lanka. Thank you. Take care. Have a great night, and God bless.
Thank you.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.